I am Joshua K. Sabra, Esquire, and he is Dr. Miles Salisbury. And you are listening to the Miles Ahead podcast, where we share tactics, techniques, and protocol to improve your physical, mental, and spiritual health while you walk the path of the warrior. Stay tuned. In today's episode, Dr. Miles and I discuss the true source of the mental health epidemic, why it is so easy to be diagnosed or misdiagnosed, and some of the consequences, first, second, and third order consequences that come from the mental health epidemic. Stay tuned. Happy Father's Day to you, Miles.
Thank you, sir. You're next.
Hey, listen, if my kids ever figure out where I live and my real name, I will, well, one, I'll have a very busy Father's Day. Are you, you're watching the games?
Oh yeah. Euro Cup 2024 is officially going.
Do you put money on those, or you just get excited just to get excited about them?
No, I've just been a fan since I was a sperm, for sure. I mean, there's DraftKings where you can throw down little stuff. I hate betting. I hate losing money. So no, I don't do that. But yeah, it's cool because that's going on in Copa America. So it's like almost like the World Cup's on again. You know, it's like 2/3 of the world was playing. So go England and then go USA in both those tournaments. And then second fiddle Germany, since I used to live there. I'll root for them too. Although England and Germany are massive rivals, so it's always hard to decide.
Yeah, well, it's just fun to see people compete at the highest level, right?
Oh yeah, it's a good Father's Day present. I was watching the pregame on Fox, and Peter Schmeichel was a former goalie for Denmark, and his son plays, and also goalie Kasper Schmeichel. And he was like, "This is the best Father's Day present I could have, watching my son play today." And he's calling the game, and it's like, this is really cool. It's kind of cool to watch.
That is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That is really cool. What are you listening to? Or are you just listening to sports right now?
Yeah, I'm still in podcast land. I'm listening to Dr. Rhonda Patrick's podcast she recently had on Dr. Huberman and Peter Attia. Oh, the Jocko Go is casualty. And we're going to take a pause while we clean up this mess. One sec.
I'm on.
And we're back real quick. Sorry about that. Jocko goes. One down. One back up. Anyways, Dr. Rhonda Patrick's podcast. I've been listening to her. Yeah.
What's she talking about?
She had Peter Attia and Dr. Huberman on. And they're giving their usual stuff. It's a good repeat. If you listen to the podcast, you're basically just getting what they talk about, but she asked some good questions. And if you like physical health, those are good ones. Her podcast is good. It's up there with those ones. And she was one of the originators of doctors talking about stuff professionally to the general populace and translating it into normal person speak for the most part.
Yeah, Dr. Huberman is like a very he gives a very mechanical description of the 5 pillars of health, which is like movement, sleep, diet, personal relationships, quiet,
exercise,
movement.
Yeah.
He talks about that as impacting your ability to context shift and which is like be present to what is happening. And if you're able to do that, that's basically your quality of life, which we're going to be talking about today, actually a lot about your ability to be present in your own life and the deviation from that. I've been listening to Bad Religion, Sorrow, Bad Religion, The New Dark Ages, American Jesus, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Greg 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 Graffin, Greg Gaffin, the lead singer of Bad Religion, also a teacher at UCLA, specifically philosophy. I think he's a philosophy teacher, and he's got very thoughtfully informed lyrics. And I specifically like the New Dark Ages because he talks about or he mentions the fact that like doublespeak, Orwellian labeling, questioning of fundamental truths, which we all know in our bones to be real, in the New Dark Ages. It's like a repeat of the original Dark Ages, which is like religion is more important than science and reason. And yeah, and I like punk rock, and it's banging. It's good to run to and to lift to. So yeah, Bad Religion, if you haven't delved into it, it's a fun one. And yeah, man, I wanted to talk about the mental health epidemic.
Are we in one?
Yeah, apparently, depending on the headlines that you read. And it's been the topic of conversation a lot in the last 3 years. I mean, since the pandemic, and the obvious, pressure on mental health that isolation causes, which is good. I think there's a lot of positive side effects to paying attention to mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, as we're going to dive into today, it is also obvious that people, whether they're establishment medical personnel or couch therapists like myself, or lay therapists like myself, or people who are listening to other people talk, it's really easy to fall into a trap of pseudoscience, misdiagnosis, general misinformation, and most dangerous, disempowering narratives around the topic of mental health. And you said something that I thought would be really important to kick off the conversation around mental health, which is it's always been here. And we go through what I took away from what you said is that we have always experienced problems in adjusting to our society, and over the course of human history, we've just relabeled them and framed them differently depending on the prevailing narrative at the time. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, it's existential for humans. Religion helped explain psychiatric phenomena, human behavioral phenomena forever in different cultures, in mythology, philosophy. Our human minds have been trying to figure out why we think and feel and behave the way we do since probably became conscious in some way. And then you fast forward thousands of years to now, and now we have, Carl Jung said what used to be under the help of the clergy has fallen to the psychiatrist or whatever back in his time. That was the last handoff from where people went to go get help on how to do life. It was a place of religion for the most part in Western society. So it's come to us, and now we're sort of fine slicing phenomena and making diagnoses and categories and taxonomies and blah, blah, blah. It's all good, but it can get a little soupy and confusing, and there's a lot of debates, and the scientific method comes into play, which is helpful. But then again, it's really hard to quantify the psyche, easy to quantify behavior. So we've got one foot in, 1 foot out, this stuff, but it's good. Now we're bringing in the whole conversation of neurobiology and neurology, which we should. How does sleep, diet, exercise factor into how you are now, how you are gestating in the womb, and how does that play into mental health phenomena, with epigenetics upregulating certain phenomena or not. So yeah, it's always been with us, and the culture also makes the disorder sometimes. Like we're getting crushed right now with current times, and like I said, the pandemic, and then two parents working, not enough attention on the kids. That's going to cause a problem. Socioeconomic disparities, things like that. Wars. It's a humdinger. Smartphones. What you've seen Jonathan Haidt's work on what that's doing to kids. His book, The Anxious Generation, just came out. He also wrote a good one. He had a co-author called The Coddling of the American Mind. That's also talking about this kind of stuff, how the culture makes the disorder. So yeah, it's always been here. We always find a way to work with it, and it's just ever evolving.
When you say religion used to frame this conversation, what was the narrative? Do you have specific examples of the prevailing narrative around in their religion?
Yeah, depends on the religion you're talking about. I think so. I like Buddhism because they've been basically psychologists for 2,500 years. Like, why are humans behaving this way? Why do we have these emotions? What do we do with these thoughts? There's a whole way to work with them with meditation. Same with Stoicism and philosophy. It's not really a religion, but it sounds like one sometimes, acts like one sometimes. Christianity, we know how they more or less work with it. I think they did borrow some from Stoicism in the 1500s. It just depends. Like the 10 Commandments, if you follow these 10 things, you'll probably be happier than not, or whatever. That sort of overlay. Or when you go to confession in the Catholic tradition and talk about, just get it off your chest, whatever it is, and that's a form of therapy in a way, even though I don't know how helpful it was. But for some people, I'm sure it got twisted at some point as a means of control over other people. But at first pass, it's a good idea to be able to process with somebody in confidence. So that's what I mean.
I like the idea of confession. I think journaling is a great opportunity for confession. I think the problem with confession in a religious sense comes in when, well, one, you have no idea what the person on the other side is going to prescribe to you, right? Like oftentimes, at least in movies, which is like 100% of my experience with confession. But there's like a Hail Mary or some sort of compensation for the sin or the transgression. And there is a law in behavioral economics, not a law, there is an observation in behavioral economics that if somebody pays some amount of penance for a behavior, they increase the behavior. So that they've noticed that like people who are, this is a study done in Israel, but people who are late picking up their kids, when the school instituted a fee, like a $15 fee for picking your kids up late, the more parents were late than but they were before. Like, so people would, yeah. So what would happen is if someone was like going to be 5 minutes late, then once they were 6 minutes late, they would just, okay, well, I'm just going to stop at the store and get the things I needed.
Gotcha.
Because I'm already paying the fee.
Fuck it. Let me get some, whatever. Yeah.
I'll get the value out of
the value out of my time,
out of my compensation. Well, right. So what had happened is that they felt vindicated for their, for their sin or their, behavioral problem. And then the behavioral, because they felt the ambivalence was alleviated with the compensation, then they were free to go further. And what it did is it illustrated the fact that the transactional element of consequences is not helpful to behavioral change. And Orange Theory has lived this out in real life, instituting fees, right? If you schedule for a class, one of the biggest problems in adult group fitness is utilization, is planning utilization. The reason why you have 500 members at a gym that there should probably only be 200 members is because you can only predict, about 60% of the time who's going to be where, exercising when, and you only have so many instructors, so many slots. So Orange Theory tried to, create a system where, okay, so you're coming twice a week, book out the classes. And if you can reschedule, but if you no show, you pay a fee for taking up a spot that somebody else could take up. And what happens is people just no show more because they're like, oh, well, I'm paying for this.
It's mine.
So it's mine. So now they feel more entitled to the occupying the space than less. So I have friends who have paid hundreds of dollars in fees and have never worked out less because
Or either way, for Orange Theory, it works out.
it works out for Orange Theory, but it doesn't work out for the person, which is who they're trying to serve, right? So that's ultimately like, how do you actually impact the behavior? But anyways, the full digression off of religion.
That's humans figuring out human behavior and psychology right there.
Right. And now the conversation around mental health is, you say it's always been here, and I think you're absolutely right. And it's always been here. Now we have some words to describe it, and according to prevailing theory, those words change all the time. But now we're describing people who have depressive tendencies or bipolar or symptoms of PTSD or what have you. And now, unfortunately or fortunately, we have somewhat more precise language and a system for these things. And now it's mayhem because we have people like me who are literate and consider ourselves thoughtful, and we'll hear a description and be like, yeah, that's close enough. I have X, whatever it is. And there's a whole host of side effects. So let's talk about, let's do this in a Ben Franklin analysis type of method, where you take a piece of paper, you slice it down the middle, and on the left side, you write the pros, on the right side, the cons. Okay. So what are in terms of where we're at today with our mental health crisis or epidemic, what are the pros of being in a hyper-aware, hyper-connected, educated society where we can have that conversation? So what are the benefits of it? So how does that support the humans in the system? And then what are the consequences? So what are the negative consequences? So there's positive consequences, negative consequences. So what are the cons? So let's start with the pros, because maybe those are easier to quantify, and then we can lay into the cons.
Yeah. First one that smacks me in the face is if we're even able to have this conversation, things are going right. We have enough time and space and peace and freedom to talk about sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or self-actualization. I can actually talk about what I'm thinking and feeling. I'm not like searching to fucking survive or survive a bullet or whatever, like
you and I are not.
Most people. Think about it. In Western society, that's most of us. We can talk about mental health. There's a lot of people. There are a lot of people. Yeah, they're like, why are you guys even? It's not. No, I need to eat. And I need to not die for sure. But like take that in as a pro within the bad. Like, at least we can talk about this stuff. That's good. It's good. It's everywhere. It's always been here, like you said. But we can talk about it. We can sit down, even though things are stressful right now and it's causing a lot of angst. We still have the space to talk about it and the platforms to talk about it. So that's good. Like, let's talk about why we hurt so we can not hurt. And let's talk about why things are so we can work with them or optimize them or whatever. So that's one pro. Maybe we can study it. We can put people into psychotherapy. We can talk about medications. We could talk philosophies that help. This is all good stuff. And then flipping to the con is like, We're not going there yet. Okay. I just got vetoed. I don't have any more pros in the moment. What are you thinking?
So to reflect back to you, the pro is that we're evolved enough as a society to where we can have a tackle as a societal problem, mental health, which is meaning that there's no famine, there's no dust bowl, there's no war looming. So we can actually get into it. So there's a level of safety inherent into our society, potentially.
Affluence.
We have the affluence, exactly. We have the educational literacy, the literacy levels where we can discuss functional spectrums at all, which isn't fairly new, in the evolution of humans, at least. And so it's a sign of health of the society that we can even inspect the health of our population and care about it.
Yep.
And then I will add that a framework of mental health and a categorization and illumination of spectrums, for me personally, whenever I see myself identified on a spectrum of anything, I am ambitious enough to want to climb it. So I don't mind being labeled as lower on the lower on any spectrum, because in my mind, I personally can move up in a rating system, in a spectrum. And I never thought about, I didn't know what social mobility was. This is my aside on this is, I took a sociology class when I was a freshman in college, and I didn't know what social mobility was or even what the classes were. I understood loosely the blue collar, white collar thing. That was my sense of what class is. And there's a lot of classes
within those classes.
Within those classes that I had never heard of. The investment class, those are the class of people that run the country, and the class of people that who's the guy that is the treasurer? No, the prime minister of the UK, the Indian gentleman, and he was in an interview, and he said, someone asked him, "Do you know anyone who makes an hourly wage?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course." No. And he just thought about it for a second. It's like, no,
personally.
Actually, I don't. And that's the investment class. People
super
who
owners
have never been exposed to someone who has a job.
Mm-hmm. Super owners of businesses, yeah.
And then there's the upper middle class, people who are professional managers, CEOs.
Super earners,
correct. And then there's the middle class, people who are, effectively doing the work of running the country. Those are your middle managers, your doctors, your attorneys, your, professionals, your plumbers, your engineers, people who are like, doing things that are, certified trades. Mm-hmm. And then lower middle class, which are, your person who is managing your Home Depot and people who kind of like get shit done. And then there's lower class, underclass, which are people who are only seasonally employed and struggle with health issues. And when I first learned about that spectrum, I was like, oh, there's my class.
It's all up here from health.
It's only upside for me, baby. But I immediately was like, I could climb that ladder. I get that, concept. And so if you can frame your capacity, your mental health skill, the skill with which you navigate your own mental health, I think for me, it's implied that you can climb that ladder. And that doesn't mean that my analogy is, if you have MS, you always have MS, but you can become asymptomatic. So if you have a mental health issue, you may have bipolar disorder, but you can ameliorate your symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a depressive disorder or, clinical depression, and you can ameliorate your symptoms with lifestyle changes, perhaps medication. I think we'll talk about that, but you can climb up the spectrum of functionality,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I care about, because functionality equals quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the list. I would add that to the pros of the mental health epidemic.
Yeah.
And so that we've got awareness, we've got societal safety, and we've got upward mobility.
There's probably a lot of other ones we could talk about, but yeah.
Okay, if we come up,
There's awareness, basically. Awareness, and then we have tools.
Awareness and empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now let's talk about the cons to the mental health epidemic, or the crises of mental health as it's been labeled.
Complacency, victimhood, learned helplessness, weaponization of psychological terms like you're a narcissist, you're a borderline. Like, you know, how many people are actually not truly have narcissistic personality disorders, really low, but someone's selfish, you're a narcissist. Like, you have trauma. Like, it's thrown around. This cheapens the word. Sort of like, what Game of Thrones character are you? I'm House Targaryen, and that's me forever. I have this diagnosis now, and now, oh, that's why I can't do shit. Okay, great. I'm going to play Xbox the rest of my life because I'm fucked. Then that's, you want it's helpful to know if you have a diagnosis, know what the hell's going on. It can really help you go, oh, that's why I think that way. That's why I do that. Or this is why I'm feeling that way. But then they're like, and here's all the ways you can get better. And people go, no, I'm just going to label myself this and be a victim and wear it as a badge of honor sometimes because I'll get attention, like, okay, that's one thing you can do with it. But when there is a lot of knowledge, this is what happens, right? What do we do with that knowledge? When we have the luxury of sitting in all this safety, then we can fuck around with this shit, and that's the problem, right? Whereas, like, you think of people in a third world country where there's a lot of poverty, and sometimes you look at those people and they're actually really happy. Like, they're struggling, sure, but like, they have community, they have good relationships. They're not wanting for a whole lot like we are. Like, yeah, sure, they're wanting for nice things, but like, not dreaming of that new Porsche, and they're not getting depressed and they don't get it. Like, they got a new toilet and it flushes. Like, that's fucking cool for them. Like, there's something to that, like, where it is for us in this life of luxury we have, it's easier for us to get depressed over dumb things sometimes. So that's a con. There's just so much goodness that we kind of can mess it up, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know, I'm kind of getting lost to my own ADD here, but see, there I go.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot wrapped up in what you said, but we'll take it line by line, because complacency, I think also othering,
Yeah, definitely.
You said something, talking about we could label ourselves and disempower ourselves and over-identify with something,
or other people,
so we can abdicate our responsibility, and then we can other people and abdicate our responsibility to connect with them. Yep. And I was a young soldier in the Army, and my peers described me as arrogant. And I was complaining about this to my squad leader, Rich Burkowski, legend. And he was like out of the 1950s. He's constantly, he wore aviator glasses, and he always like stared off camera. Like, he was always like, he would give very sardonic comments. He would always he would make eye contact, but he would just look over your shoulder and just chain smoke. And we were outside and, he was drinking a beer, and I was like, we're playing Scrabble or something in Germany. And I said, all of my platoon mates, described me as arrogant. And that makes me mad. And he just like, spoke. He's like, that's good. Arrogant is a word to describe people who are confident and competent at the same time. And usually the people describing them are incompetent and insecure. And he's like, just spoke. He's like, that's fucking good. Moving on. And, and he just couched it like that. And it is an oversimplification, but he described a trend of like, if someone has a quality you don't like, it's negative. Or if somebody has a quality you wish you had, it's negative. We project a shadow and then we give it a bunch of labels that are convenient to us that allow us to feel morally superior or, at the very least, distant. And I think there's a lot of that embedded in this is our egocentric. If we think of ourselves as as the normal spectrum and everybody else is deviant from us, then we can now have, because if I don't have the capacity to be self-interested and make a self-informed decision that benefits me, if I don't have that capacity well developed, and you say, you make decisions that are preferential to yourself, for your health or the safety of your family or whatever, now you're selfish. And that allows me to feel superior to you because you're not doing what I would do or what I would want you to do for me. So you're the problem. And now you're a narcissist.
Yeah. So there we go. Weaponization of psychological terms.
So it prevents us from doing the work. And basically what we're saying is the antithesis of all the pros is the con. If you are empowered and aware and motivated and galvanized to engage your own health, great. If you are disempowered and distancing yourself from responsibility and disconnecting, then those are the cons. And you have justification in your mind because it's scientific, right? And it's and it's the prevailing language, but that's and I also think that's a disservice to I want to dive into the specific labels and how they're maybe inappropriate. And they also distance us from the work that we actually need to do for our own betterment. Thoughts? Would you add anything?
Lead us in.
All right. I want to go back to the spectrum of psychological traits. OCEAN is the acronym. Openness, conscientiousness, what's the A?
Of the big five?
Yeah.
They don't know them very well.
Openness, conscientiousness, empathy, agreeableness, and
neuroticism.
And it's not always more is better. You just need to know where you're at on the spectrum. And I'm not going to define each term, but I just want to give an example for how this plays out. So let's talk about openness. Openness to new experiences, new ideas, openness to, it's a measure of how rigid you are in like controlling your own experience. Is that correct?
On one level, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can move up and down these. Some are hardwired in to your temperament at birth, and then at others you can maneuver. Nature, nurture.
So I'm high open, high agreeable. And there's a lot of pro-social benefits to that. I can engage and I can listen and be thoughtful and have my mind changed. And I can make you feel comfortable. But a lot of my agreeableness was because of an enmeshed background. My enmeshed environment. So I came from the factory with some decent agreeableness, And then it was exacerbated or amplified by an enmeshed parenting relationship. So because of my lack of boundaries, I had been too agreeable. And I'm still working on this, but when I'm enlightened or healed or present with my own boundaries and my own identity and ego, I'm actually a little less agreeable than I might have been otherwise. So the reason why I talk about the spectrum and how it moves, right, is if we are mislabeling ourselves and misdiagnosing ourselves and hiding behind an inventory or a trait tree, what we don't do is we don't examine, is this useful? Like what is the benefit of staying this way? Sometimes there is.
You get seen, right? You have an answer, or it's a virtue signal, whatever,
Totally.
One sec. Yeah, so it depends. Yeah, there are someone. If you are doing that, you are getting something from doing that for sure. Wouldn't occur to you to do it otherwise. I think, even though it's a lot of negative drawbacks to doing that, you're not getting better. But I mean, for someone who's never been seen or heard, if you can stamp a diagnosis on your forehead and walk around and point to it and be seen for the first time, that's actually going to feel kind of good. So there are reasons why people do this. It makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the booby prize, as you often say, is the explanation for why. Like, oh, I was enmeshed, so I have to be agreeable. I'm naturally I'm naturally convincible, to different things, which is ridiculous because what does Alan Watts say? If you can be talked out of yourself, you deserve it. Like, if you can be talked out of your confidence in who you are, then you deserve to be talked out of it. And he's referencing guruism and the search for truth and enlightenment.
Oh yeah, if you just put all that onto a guru and say, "Tell me what to think and feel," yeah.
Which is like our new version of mental health.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. What influencer has the answer this week? Who has no training, by the way, and just looks shit up and makes shit up.
Or has training and is thoughtful and actually, like, let's talk to even a Peter Attia, who is probably right about whatever he's talking about, but only you know the answer of what's right for you. Ultimately. And it's not about agree or disagree with a doctor or agree or disagree with an influencer. It's about fitting the truth to the life that you want to lead. And it may be more or less difficult based on your predisposition and or your ailments, using quotations here. But as long as you're abdicating responsibility to someone else to tell you.
That's dangerous. Yeah. So what people do with politics these days. Same thing.
So the overdiagnosis, the mental health epidemic, in a way, is preventing or is interrupting people's natural development and sidelining and distracting the conversation that we're having with ourselves around what we need and where we need to go with our own life and our attention, in moments. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
So then how would you advise somebody so if you're diagnosed with, if you're diagnosed with PTSD, and you're 20, or ADHD and you're 20, what would you I mean, actually, you probably do deal with this. So how do you deal with people who might be over diagnosed and over treating something that maybe does need attention, but maybe, needs a different angle of approach?
Layered question. Everyone's a little different. Let's sort of take the biopsychosocial approach. Get the what happened, get the family inventory.
Stop.
Why?
Because
This is not an easy question.
No, I know. And this is that's why we can do it in pieces. Like, so the significance of the family inventory, talk about that.
All right. Well, I was going to, but first, usually what I do is I say, here's all the things I do, and then I'll go back and explain exactly what I do. Biopsychosocial. So what we can go back, we can do it this way. So I always want to know what happened, where they came from, family dynamics, relationships. If it's trauma, what did your parents have trauma? What was your trauma? What does that trauma mean to you? If they came to me with this diagnosis already from another clinician, I want to know, well, how did they get there? Is it really PTSD? It probably is, but maybe it's not. Maybe I got accidentally left home once by my parents. Like, does that fit the diagnostic criteria for a post-traumatic stress disorder? Or is that more like an acute stress disorder that happened back then that's just hurts still? Are you having flashbacks, nightmares, can't sleep, blah, blah? Probably don't have PTSD. Probably just have a painful moments in your life. So sometimes that stamp gets thunk, and then that's in your chart forever. So we'd be careful with that. Question.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Like, so
definitely true.
Someone can have a label of PTSD with a conversation. They don't like if that experience that you just, was that a made up example, or is that?
No, this happens all the time. Like, you'll get a PCP that hears 5 minutes someone's life story and goes, oh, you must have this. That's in their chart, PTSD. Like, whoa, like that follows you around, or any other diagnosis. Like, that's why we have to be careful with diagnosing. That's why I'm very careful with diagnosing. Like, once that's in your record, especially in like the Epic system that hospitals use, it's really hard to get it off. It will follow you around forever. So we want to get diagnosis right. So I'm really reluctant to even give a diagnosis unless it's super obvious. The only reason we need is to fucking bill insurance. If we didn't need that, we probably would never even really diagnose people. Like, on paper, we were just like, here's sort of the phenomena they're swimming in. Like, this gives me an idea of where to go, but I don't need to like stamp a rubber stamp of X criteria diagnosis on somebody. That's intense. But the hospital systems definitely do that.
This is wild, because the amount of people that hear this goes with everything, things that you couldn't possibly diagnose with a conversation. My friend was diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis. You know what this is?
Mm-mm.
Calcification of the spine. Very painful, very debilitating. And he had a lot of back and hip pain when he was a young soccer player. We're gonna have him. We're gonna have him on the show. Cool. Aziz Gazapura. He was diagnosed with this condition, which was, his story is complex, and we'll let him get into it. But it turns out that he doesn't have it, and that this diagnosis was given to him with a couple conversations with a doctor when he was like 14 or 15. And they put him on this autoimmune medication that he became dependent on.
Oh boy.
For his whole adult life.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That's an extreme example, but that's what I'm talking about.
But this, like an autoimmune disease of the spine without imaging.
Right. Let's look inside. Yeah.
Right. And the incentive, and like, what is the incentive for the provider to do that? to a person because they want to help or because they have to have something to show the insurance company to get compensated?
It's that, and it's the system being ill where they have to see 500 people in 1 hour. Like, you get 10 minutes. Let me just let's see if this sticks, and next. Like, it's the system is also ill. I don't think providers are meaning to do this. I think they're just slammed. There's not enough, and the system doesn't want to pay for more. And yes, they want to bill, and it's just a goddamn mess. So it's like a multifaceted problem. I don't think there are doctors out there who are evil and like, let's just make this diagnosis. They just want to get through and get to the next patient, which you should be spending like a long time with that person, but they get almost nothing. It's really a disservice.
So this, I mean, in a sense, we just freaking solved the problem when we just identified where the mental health epidemic comes from. If you have to have a diagnosis to continue to see somebody or to get compensated, you're going to get some fucking diagnosis.
You are going to get a diagnosis.
Human behavior is so easy to explain once you understand incentives. It's so simple. It's so simple. This is why economists think they're smarter than everyone, is because engineers and doctors like have all the math, and
100%.
And economists are like,
you can quantify everything.
Yeah, you got paid to do that. And what you will pay for and what you get paid for emotionally, but money is emotional and substantial because it affects your safety and security and your psychological sense of value. So and the expectations of the industry and all those things. So there's like so many layers to actual money, that money is so much more impactful than just the dollar that's changing hands. Quick example. So it's well documented that someone will go $500 out of their way to correct a $50 injustice. Meaning it's 10 times more valuable for a consumer to do something that they think is socially just than actually convenient for them. So what's in the consumer's best interest is not what happens. What happens is what's in the consumer's best interest in preservation of their psyche and their ego, and in good and bad ways, or rather convenient or inconvenient ways, or negative and positive ways. And another thing, humans will reject a deal that's unfair to them, even if they benefit. So if I offer Miles $5 and his friend Phil $5 for free, they'll both take that deal. Now, if I offer Miles to take $4 and Phil takes $6, Miles will still say yes. But a large percentage of the population will say no to $3 that is free just because Phil gets $7. And so what people do is they punish themselves because the system is unfair, and they'll say no to something that benefits them just because it doesn't benefit them enough in their
sense of fairness.
In their sense of fairness. So humans are very, very socially influenceable, and we wrap logic around it to make it make sense in our world, but we're totally emotional creatures.
Yep, irrational in that way.
So, wow, this is way more juicy than I thought, because we're gonna go through your psychosocial inventory, but the mechanism, the system in which these diagnoses are generated is highly flawed, to say it gently.
Because of insurance, yeah. The DSM-5 as it is now. Yeah, it's a bunch of psychiatrists get together and decide what psychiatric phenomena is and exists, and then they have different diagnostic criteria and labels for them, which is, it's good we're trying to do that, but I always take it with a grain of salt and like a snapshot of what could be. And knowing that it's changed 5 times, like it might change again, and sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. So that's what's going on there.
So we've got how would the economists, an inefficient system. I think they would describe it as a inefficient, a system for inefficient outcomes built in. And then on top of that, tell me about this, the inventory. How does your parents' trauma impact your your own personal story in that way, because you're like, I want to know what your parents' trauma is and what your childhood was like. And so how do those things impact your own personal mental health spectrum?
So many layers. One, it's like how you do you understand relationships? Because if we go back to attachment theory, that's what I'm kind of getting at there. If there was, what were we talking about, the in Bessel van der Kolk's book, Body Keeps the Score, the 4 traumas or whatever that's what I'm talking about.
So in the book you're referencing is The Body Keeps the Score, and Dr.
Bessel van der Kolk, Dutch.
Dr. Dutchman, he labels and does not get it into the DSM-5. He labels developmental trauma disorder as an impact of child abuse, defined as either neglect, enmeshment, physical and mental abuse, physical abuse or mental abuse, and physical abuse would encompass sexual abuse as well. So of those 4, one of those or all of those 4 things could be present in your childhood, which would implicate you in DTD, which developmental trauma disorder. And that never got acknowledged by the DSM and saying it's unnecessary. And
that's what I'm talking about. The DSM being good and sometimes being, bro, this could be a great thing to put in. Because you're talking about what happens in childhood versus like what happens when you're a veteran. And that's a different kind of PTSD. It's similar flavors, but if this stuff hits when you're a kid, it's so much harder to work with than if it happens as an adult. Still hard, but those things you described are what I'm looking for. And even generationally, if they know, how long has this been going on? So I want, this is the sort of the biopsychosocial assessment, and then sleep, diet, exercise, what's going on there. Because we know that's not paid enough attention to, I think, in our field. If you can get someone's sleep figured out, a lot of times depression goes away, anxiety goes away, or depressive symptoms, I should say, not major depressive disorder necessarily, or eating better or exercise, or the confluence of all 3. Some people won't even need to go to therapy anymore, because this stuff will exacerbate your psychiatric phenomena big time. If you have some sort of psychosocial issue going on, say you broke up with somebody, and you don't sleep, you eat like shit, and you don't move, that's going to be 1,000 times harder it's going to be way worse. So your ability to regulate your emotions gets thrown off if you don't sleep. Your ability to regulate appetite, suppression, and non-suppression gets flipped. You're going to overeat, or starve yourself, and that's going to get all cattywampus. So if you work with that area with a lot of people, they get better. And I was jokingly telling you before about that, one patient I had who came up from California and was depressed. And it's like, I don't know why I'm depressed. And we were talking about it, and there was no like family history. No, he was on medications, never experienced it before. There was no like seminal event. He was just, I feel like shit. I'm like, well, do you take vitamin D? He's like, why would I do that? I'm like, well, you came from California and look outside. He's like, yeah, it's raining. Goes, yep, that's where vitamin D comes from. Nope, the sun. Check, no sun. My homework to you is go get a vitamin D supplement and let me know. And he called back 2 days and said, I feel amazing. I don't need to come back in. I was like, easy paycheck. So sometimes you got to check for the physiological part. You had a question?
So this is the frame, the column that you would place this under is physiological inside of the inventory of psycho.
Yeah, it's in the bio.
Oh, it's in the bio.
Yeah, biological. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in my work, the outputs of health are, you don't have direct input into, you have influence on. So when I'm working with somebody, I want to know what their energy levels are, their digestion, their sleep, their hunger, so their level of appetite, all those things, right? Those physiological, they're almost like your RPMs, a sense of how hard the motors work, and specifically the central nervous system, mm-hmm. what we're talking about. But you can't really, you can not eat and your appetite will get triggered a little bit, but if you are, and many Americans are this way, if you were a workaholic, your appetite is naturally suppressed by your cortisol and adrenaline all the time. So your appetite, if you don't eat all day, your appetite might get down to, on a scale of 1 to 10, it might be a 2 or a 3, but you'll be kind of lightheaded and you'll be foggy and you'll notice
Irritable.
the cognitive effects,
Brain fog.
but you won't notice the hunger. And so a lot of these inputs, you can't make yourself hungry. You can influence it. You can make yourself tired, but you can't make yourself sleep well. You can influence it. You can create a sleep environment, have a good sleep hygiene. You can give yourself sleep pressure with exercise and other things like that. But you don't necessarily directly create those biological outputs. You have to monitor them and see how your behavior impacts them over time. And I get frustrated with my own freaking biological outputs. I've been working on my sleep for almost a year, and I am almost, I'm 2/3 of the way to restoring a natural sleep cycle. So it's very slow, but it's taken, I'm pulling all the levers every day.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Modern
Alcohol,
living.
Fat loss, recomposition, diet, everything, sleep mode, temperature, everything. And when, it's only after like doing the work for a long period of time that I realize how pervasive and persistent sleep issues have been in my career.
Not the only one. Yeah. It's crazy. Modern living, back to culture creating the problem. A lot of light that shouldn't be on at night and a lot of stimulus, the best way to reset your sleep is just go somewhere in nature for 2 weeks and don't bring any clocks or watches and just see what happens. Natural sunrise, natural sunset, sleep cool. Like bring your sleep hygiene to nature. Then you'll probably know your own natural circadian rhythm after a while.
There's some truth to that. I think this is also, so much of the population has DTD, developmental trauma disorder. Again, for those of you listening, taking notes.
And how is he defining that? Is he defining that just those 4 major traumas occurring in 0 to 15 or something?
Essentially it's a few of the adverse childhood event markers in, more than 3 or 4 or 5 of them in a developmental stage.
So we're going beyond just attachment wounds. We're talking like severe attachment wounds.
Well, severe attachment wounds. I mean, I guess if you, if your parents fight 3 times a week and interrupt your sleep with yelling and screaming, how would you define that attachment wound? How would you define that? What is the trauma? Is that emotional abuse? Is that neglect? Is that and then the reason why I bring that particular one up is I think a lot of people have these, I would say,
like micro traumas,
little T-top traumas. That's not one of the big 4, but it becomes
over time.
It becomes a thing where the kid doesn't feel safe. Mm-hmm. And so it ends up being a form of neglect. Mm-hmm. It's like, you don't have a safe sleep environment. Mm-hmm. And that is enough to dysregulate.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. And so the importance of something like a developmental trauma diagnosis just allows you to have this conversation very specifically in a way that allows you to begin to reassociate parts of you that were disconnected and have appropriate emotional responses to what is happening. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people have some of these in their life where Taylor Tomlinson talks about her childhood trauma. She's like, I'm like most people. I learned that my childhood was traumatic by the looks of horror on other people's faces when I was talking about things that we did all the time. Yeah. And you're having the conversation and you're like, oh,
that's not normal.
Your parents didn't leash you up to the clothesline when they were gone. Oh, just kidding. We didn't do that either. And and I think a lot of, what we just think of as normal is to our experience normal. And my therapist said, I think only a few months ago, oh, well, you've dealt with abuse the way you have. And I bristled at it, and I didn't acknowledge it. And I was thinking, I was like, why would you say that? And because I don't, describe myself as an abused person. But if you go through the ACE, I might have 39 of the 41 inventory items.
Adverse childhood experiences questionnaire.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you see these things, become very obvious, when you step out of the painting and you say like, oh yeah, these are interruptive experiences to your development.
Yep.
And so you're investigating this stuff, and what someone may be not present to, of like, oh, I was abandoned by my father, which is Esther Perella's labeling as ambiguous loss, where you have psychological abandonment, where the parent's there but not with you.
They're just kind of props in the house.
And then actual abandonment, parents physically gone, or parent is psychologically with you, but physically they're divorced, but they still love you and they connect with you over the phone, or they're deployed and they still have, positive relationship with you, but they can't be there. And like those traumas and how they accumulate and affect the way that we regulate our nervous system. Back to this all impacts how our health is emblematic of these things. And people who have these experiences might not have physical outward signs of physiological issues, but you can measure them. You can measure them on a blood pressure cuff. You can measure them with blood work. You can measure them with a sleep study. It'll be very...
If you can connect the dots, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
trying to prove that sometimes is hard, but in our field, we can make the case, but it's not a one-to-one quantifiable thing sometimes, unfortunately.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean?
So I always think of like people that present with like fibromyalgia. Like it's like, I have pain, but you go to the doctor's like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like nothing. And I always ask, once I have a good report, did you experience trauma in your life? Like, yeah. Okay. If we go back to the book, The Body Keeps the Score. This is literally what's happening on some level. What you don't take on, your body will, or your body takes on for you, and so a lot of people that have fibromyalgia don't generally seek therapy, or haven't, because they've been ignoring it, stuffing it, scared of it, with good reason. It's no fun to go into it. That's kind of what I'm talking about. But to go to a doctor, they're like, there's nothing wrong with you. And this is they call it a conversion disorder. Like your mental health is making this physical health problem, which is a thing too as well.
Well, this is a whole rabbit hole, and maybe we can, pick this up on episode 2, part 2 of this, because this conversation needs to go a lot further. But I am biased to my own lived experience and my own observations over the last 20 years. And I have seen such little pain associated with physical injuries, and so much pain associated with, you could insert language for TMS, or which is basically muscle tension derived from emotional pain. All of these disorders, anxiety disorders, IBS, fibromyalgia. I could list a dozen or 24 things that I, not with 100% X plus Y equals Z,
Correct.
but I'm the Venn diagram of trauma and pain is heavily overlapping. And maybe we'll start up our next episode with that list, because I think it's insightful to people who are like me, who are low maintenance, high functioning people who just don't associate those things together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But just to say that Harvard Medical School, and I was at Stanford Medical School, was doing a study on back pain, and they were trying to figure out what pain, what injuries cause the most pain and what treatments alleviated it the most. And then what they found is that a lot of people who, like a third of people who were presenting with back pain had, only a third of people who presented with back pain had injuries of some kind, like a crushed disc or fractured vertebrae or something like the spinal stenosis. And 2/3 of them had no pathology at all, but they had pain.
They did X-ray and it's all good.
MRIs.
MRIs, wow, even better.
Very deep looks. And so they were like, okay, well, what percentage of the general population has a back injury at all? So they did the whole, everyone in the medical school, all the staff, all the faculty. A third of the faculty and staff had back injuries and no pain. And so it's like just a percentage of us just get injured and get on with it. And a disc injury, the body has redundant systems. So you can damage a system. You can have all of the ligaments in your knee damaged and removed, but the knee is intrinsically stabilized through crossing muscle and fascia and other things. So you don't need, it's okay to have some damage is what I'm saying. So a lot of people have injuries with no pain and no physiological manifestation of pathology, no experience of that pathology. So much of our experience of pain and discomfort is and the nervous system giving us feedback to something that we haven't acknowledged. And knowing that is a weapon. Is it not to panic you about your own stuff, but is to know that you have the capacity to look inward and heal yourself. And that's why I'm so motivated to be in the health field. I love it because you do not need a surgeon to heal you. Now, if you have a broken bone, you will need a surgeon to set it. And those are important. And, medical intervention, Western medicine is borderline miraculous on many things, cancer treatment. But a lot of our healing is reliant on us.
I'd push back on the cancer treatment when we're pretty much still in the dark ages of that one.
There's a couple of cancers. I was specifically thinking of a couple of cancers that if their gene expression is right, it can be killed with treatment.
With immunotherapy.
Yeah, like like certain strains of pancreatic cancer or leukemia.
There's usually the blood cancers that have the best outcomes. Yeah, the other ones, it's like you just got to catch it early. Like get a colonoscopy. Like just do it.
Testicular exam.
Just see it. Yeah, exactly. Mammograms. But the treatment part's still kind of like once you have it, stage 4, it's like maybe you live 5 years and then it's really fucked up. We should be further ahead with that, but that's a whole other conversation.
I think I love where this went. It went a place I didn't anticipate, which is much better for me because I've already learned a lot in this conversation about, why the mental health epidemic is here, overdiagnosed because of incentive problems, because of burden on providers, because of the flawed construction of the DSM, because of the societal pressures on the individual, and because of family pressures through developmental trauma disorder that our parents came with. Generational stuff that our parents have showed up with, which is quote unquote normalized. And on the next episode, I want to talk about how we become adults with untreated developmental trauma disorder and how we disassociate from ourselves, and then how we live out this trauma in our businesses, in our personal relationships, in our romantic relationships, of course, our kids, and how that feeds into this environment and ecosystem of continued what they call generational trauma.
Yep. Passed on.
And a legacy of mental health issues and that infect society at all levels.
Internal family system calls it legacy burdens.
Amen.
Yep, we'll get into that one. All right. England's about to play, so I got to go and have Father's Day and all that stuff. So
that's right.
Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. We'll see y'all next week.
Get well soon.
We're out.